Okay, so we are now recording. This is the Housing Element Advisory Committee meeting of September 26th. That's the agenda on the screen. And Josh, I'm going to make you also a co-host.
Great.
And Victor too, just so that as I get into all this, I can. Okay, so this is our agenda. Let's go to introductions. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see all of you. I'm going to ask you to tell us your name, what affiliation to an organization, if you have one, or interest, experience related to housing, or work with the city of Pacific Grove, community issues, and what are you hoping to achieve in the Housing Element update process, if anything. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you all. Easier to call out names. I'm going to start with Hollywood Square. In the upper left-hand corner on my screen is Don Murphy.
Good morning. Or good afternoon, I guess. I'm a Pacific Grove resident and currently vice chair of the Planning Commission. I'm interested in housing on my own, but clearly the Planning Commission is going to play a role in how Pacific Grove tries to meet its, to create some new housing and meet its RHNA numbers.
Great. And Barbara Meister.
Sorry, slow on the mute. Barbara Meister, Public Affairs Director at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Really interested in housing for our staff.
Great, thanks. Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Madrigal, Housing and Sustainability Policy Manager at Monterey Bay Economic Partnership. A mouthful there, but I'm really interested in the housing element process in a regional lens and also just locally. I know it's a big jump for a lot of our smaller communities, so I was especially interested in that perspective. Thanks.
Thank you. Claudia Sawyer.
You won't see me, but I am a member of the Planning Commission. I'm very interested in how we're going to meet our RHNA numbers and being part of the process and learning as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you. John.
Yeah, John Paff. I currently am a trustee on PTSD and just interested in general as to how this is going to work out. And also, certainly we have a vested interest in trying to keep housing in a domain that's affordable to our employees. So.
Great. Thanks, John. Gabriel.
Hi, y'all. I'm Gabe Sanders. I'm the Deputy Director of Landwatch, Monterey County. And our organization's interest is to see more housing affordability across all of the cities in the county of Monterey. We related to climate policy as far as vehicle miles traveled goes and GHG emissions from transportation. But really, or as an organization and among all of our partners, including some of the people on this call, we're just looking to make the Monterey Peninsula and all of our cities more hospitable for working class people.
Great, thanks, Gabe. Rosemarie.
Oh, ditto. I'm with I do a lot of volunteer work with iHelp. I'm a retired psychiatric social worker, and I go to St. Mary's by the Sea and have for many, many years. So just looking for how our church can respond, the role of the church communities in the whole process, their interest in this. And I live in Seaside, and I'm particularly interested in how we can collaborate across cities to get the housing elements updated in a way that is smiles upon the lives of working class and people who can afford below affordable housing as well as affordable housing. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Also involved with COPA, by the way, COPA, you know, the communities in partnership together. Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Rosemary. Thanks for being here. Chaps.
Hi, everyone. Chaps Baduri with the City of Pacific Grove, interested in generally learning about housing for all and what steps can we take to meet those requirements. Really glad to see all of you here and being vested in this. I do have to drop in 20 minutes, so thank you for recording this, David. I'll catch up as the case may be. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for being here. And Val.
Hi, I'm Val Gano. I work as a realtor and a property manager for a small brokerage in Pacific Grove. And I'm also a grad student at Harvard Extension School in Sustainable Cities and Communities. I also sit on the Architecture Review Board for the City of Pacific Grove. So I'm interested in being part of this process for a number of reasons, as we sort of, and I'm a strong affordable housing advocate. However, we may get to that end goal.
Great. Thanks so much for being on the committee and joining us. So let's hear from the city staff team. Anastasia.
Good morning / afternoon, everyone. Anastasia here with the city and looking forward to this meeting. Thank you.
And Alex.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alex. I'm a planner with the city. I'm very much looking forward to this meeting. I see a lot of familiar faces, but housing is a topic close to my heart. So looking forward to the discussion.
Great. And then I've got a couple of my colleagues from Baird and Driscoll Community Planning who've been helping with analysis and putting together the balancing act tool that we're going to be testing. Victor, why don't you say hi?
Hello. I'm an associate planner helping with coordinating the engagement and work here.
And Josh.
Hi, everyone. Josh Ellsworth, also an associate with BD. Been working a lot with the data analysis and map making.
Great. And I'm David Driscoll with Baird and Driscoll Community Planning. Jay Gentry just joined. We're just finishing doing introductions, Jay, if you want to say a quick hi to the group and sort of a little bit about who you are. If you're speaking, you may be on mute. There you go. Jay, you want to say hi? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nope, still muted. We heard you for a second. We can't hear
Jay,
you.
you're muted.
Sorry, we can't hear anything that you're saying.
Damn.
No.
Nope. Now, can you hear me now?
There you go.
Oh, boy. Well, sorry for being late. Somehow I messed up the, I accepted the meeting and it showed up on my calendar, but there was no link there.
Oh, no.
So maybe we didn't get it, but whatever it is, I don't need to hold things up. Thank you, Anastasia, for sending me the link when I called and left a message.
Okay, well, glad you got it and that you're here. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing screen. So we've done that. Let's talk just really briefly about the Housing Element Advisory Committee. So the purpose of this group is to help us achieve the state law implementation in the form of a certified housing element, but in a way that reflects the values and priorities of the Pacific Grove community. So you're here to advise the staff on issues and opportunities as they relate to the housing element, serve as an informal sounding board, particularly as we get into some of the key sort of draft directions that will then be going forward to the broader public and then to the state for review. And a really important part is helping us ensure an inclusive process, that we're hearing from a full range of voices in the community. And that includes, when I say community, it includes residents, people who live here today, but very importantly for the housing element is people who work here but can't afford to live here. So we can hear from them in terms of their housing needs, and also just future generations in terms of young people growing up in the community, and making sure that there's opportunities for them to remain part of the community. It is not a formal body. There is not going to be any formal votes that we take, or we're not going to be looking for a formal recommendation from the group. That doesn't mean that you can't go and speak at public hearings that come when we're in front of planning commission and council on the housing element, but we won't be looking for an official recommendation from the committee. Any questions on that or anything additional clarification people might want to add or ask for? All good? Okay. So just quick ground rules. Everyone here is great at this. Just making sure that we make time to hear from each other, and that also that you're committed to speaking up and speaking your perspective on these issues. So we don't want any groupthink. We want a diversity of perspectives, respectful dialogue, listen to understand as other people are talking. If something's not clear, don't assume you think you know what they're saying, but ask clarifying questions. Try to maintain an open mind, not jump to conclusions about what's the thing that's going to fix our problems or solve things that we shouldn't do. Seek common ground, be a problem solver. And again, all of this is about helping us thread the needle for getting to a certified housing element, meeting state law requirements, but also being a really effective tool to meet housing needs in Pacific Grove. So I feel my role is to help you understand the state law requirements and do what we can, but your role is to help us figure out what does that look like in implementation in Pacific Grove. So I'm just going to share some lessons from reviews that have been underway. So the advantage we have and timing in the Monterey Bay area is others have gone before us in implementation of a whole set of new state law requirements. And we can learn from them in terms of what that experience has been. And so we've got actual official review letters that HCD has provided. We've been looking at those. And this is just a few high-level takeaways. One thing that is coming up a lot in almost every housing element review process is how to integrate affirmatively furthering fair housing in every aspect of the element. We just had an email chain from the planning director in Alameda, city of Alameda in the Bay Area. They were the first to get a certified element in the Bay Area. And his main takeaway from the process was it's all about fair housing, and making sure that they are integrating that in how they do their sites inventory and how they talk about their policies, and that they're connecting the dots between what they're proposing to do and what their situation is in terms of fair housing. And fair housing is ensuring that people have access to housing, regardless of race or income or disability. So things like making sure that as we look at areas that we might increase density, that we're not clustering all affordable housing in one part of town. That would be counter to the goals of AFFH. Making sure that we are identifying where we are at currently and how the new element is going to help us create a more inclusive community. So these are things that, again, will be helping you to figure out what the state's expectations are, but looking for you to help us understand really the local situation and opportunities for responding. And I'm just going to say, if there's stuff in the chat, I'll try to, okay, great. Yeah, we'll share the slides. Great. And don't hesitate to just also raise your hand or unmute and speak up if you've got questions as we go through this. I can't see everybody or even all the chat. Oh, and sure. And if you're not speaking, if you can mute so we don't get the background noise, that'd be great. Second bit is in past housing element updates, it was not uncommon to say we're going to have a program to rezone. We're going to take a particular part of the community or a particular zone district, and we're going to make some changes. And you'd say we're going to do it sometime in the next 8 years during the planning period that the housing element applies to. So the housing elements are for an 8-year period. HCD is looking for a real commitment. And one of the reasons, sorry, we're getting some background coughing. Someone, I can't see who's unmuted, but if you could mute. And also, hopefully you're not sick. So they're going to look for real commitments. So the thing that got City of Alameda an approved element in their first round of review, which I think is the first, one of the first in the state that's gotten a certified element in the first round, is they actually have been going through a rezone process neighborhood by neighborhood for the last 2 years. So they didn't have to say we're going to do it. They showed HCD that they are doing it, and it's been done in most parts of the city. So we're in an advantage in that we are, Anastasia, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think RFP is out on the street or will be soon to hire a consultant that'll actually do the rezoning and general plan, a targeted general plan update based on the housing element recommendations and policies. So we'll be able to point to that to say we are doing the rezoning. It's not just something we're thinking about, but we're actually doing it. So we also, one of the things they're looking at is it's not just a theoretical capacity analysis of rezoning or the zoning we have. So it's not, if I have a 1 acre site and I have 30 dwelling units per acre zoning on it, I don't get to say, well, it's going to be 30 units. I need to actually demonstrate that it's possible to get to those 30 units when I layer on the various aspects of the zoning requirements in terms of height and setback and open space, et cetera, or parking. And also that the market is going to be responsive to that zoning. So this is something that we'll be working with you on, but as we get into the tool today, you'll see that doing some changes to zoning don't necessarily create a lot of units. They might actually just create a few units based on our take on what the likely response in terms of zoning. A good example of that is, you know, that the state passed a regulation that basically says every single family property in the state of California could potentially have 4 units on it. And there's a set of rules about how that gets applied. Well, that, you know, sounds like it's just created a heck of a lot of capacity and we don't need to do a housing element process because there's going to be all this housing built. Well, in reality, that's not going to happen. Most single family homeowners aren't looking to redevelop their property. So the number of units that might come through in any given year is pretty low. And then the reality of actually creating those units on different sizes of property is pretty limited. So we could project some, but very few units that would come through that kind of a process. So, and I won't go through all the examples. We can talk more about those as we get into the using the tool today and why some of the numbers you'll see are fairly large relatively, and others are not. And we also need to have programs that support redevelopment, particularly for affordable housing. So we'll have the zoning in place, but what are the other things we're doing to incentivize or help facilitate the kinds of housing outcomes that we are looking for? That's a lot. Any questions, comments on that? Okay, I just got one more. Go ahead. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
I know it's very preliminary, and there probably hasn't been any studies on this done yet. But since AB 2097 is now passed into legislation, is there a way to incorporate that into the housing element? To my understanding, there's only one area I could think of in Pacific Grove along the Lighthouse corridor that might apply that might have some applicable provisions under 2097, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some opportunities we would want to, in our element, identify things we're going to do to help facilitate those outcomes. So I think the one thing the state's looking for is not just sort of a passive, well, a new state law passed and therefore we're going to see these things happen. It's going to be what are you doing as a local jurisdiction to help make something happen? So yeah, is a strip commercial going to become housing? Well, we could have it zoned for that, but if it's an active commercial use or there's other things getting in the way, it's not going to happen. But we could proactively go out and help facilitate something happening. another good example of that is, the ADU law, the state passed ADU legislation that allows everybody in the state to have both an internal, a junior ADU, and an external ADU on their property. Well, it's one thing to make it possible, it's another thing to make it happen. So the state's looking for, if you're going to count ADUs, what are you doing to help make ADUs happen? Are you out there helping homeowners understand that this is possible? Are you making it easy for them to come in and get through the process? A lot of these, you're talking about property owners who are not developers. Homeowners are not developers. They don't understand permitting processes, and it's pretty scary if you come in and look at the list of regulations. So what are you doing to help make that easier? And if you are, then you can count more units, and you'll likely see more units created through those. Last slide I have is on just sort of more process. We are planning in our timeline to have time for 2 rounds of review, and that's because what we're seeing is almost all jurisdictions are taking more than 1 round of review. In Southern California, there are jurisdictions that are in their 3rd, 4th round of review. So each one of those means, HCD sends official comments, we have to do a revision, we send it back. One of the key learnings from all the jurisdictions that are having success is, as the HCD is doing their review, they're doing modifications, changes to their draft in kind of real time, so that when they get the formal letter, they're ready to submit their next version. So that's something really kind of looking forward in terms of 2023. Everything we can do to engage with HCD and show them that we are doing our best to achieve not just the sites inventory, but to advance fair housing and do the other work that's required, the more they're going to work with us to find paths to a certified element. So the one thing we don't want to come forward is say, this is impossible, we can't do it, we're built out, and fight them every step of the way. That will not play to our favor. Yeah, Non.
Do you have a sense that jurisdictions in Southern California aren't trying? Is it they're trying and falling short, or are they not trying?
It's all over the place. I mean, there's some that are taking a somewhat antagonistic approach. Others are trying, but it's hard. I think the big takeaway is, particularly for folks who've been involved in previous housing element cycles, that everyone's saying this is a very different housing element cycle. It's just a different set of requirements. It's a much higher bar. There's a lot more focus on it from the state. And bear in mind, there is now an enforcement unit at the state that is going to be looking at sort of what are the metrics you have in your element, and are you then in future years meeting those metrics. So it's less, in the past, you did your housing element, you showed that it met all the state requirements, you had the zoning in place to meet arena, et cetera. And then 8 years later, you kind of reported on it. I mean, you have to do annual progress reports, but there wasn't a big focus on enforcement. That's changed. So it's just, and people's arena numbers are high. So just like we are gonna, have a really hard conversation about where to put that much new housing, other communities are having the same challenge. And they fall in different places on how they respond to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
David,
Yeah, sure.
I was interested in how that one municipality eliminated voter imposed restriction, and if you could just briefly in a sentence or two say what that voter imposed restriction was, so I have a better understanding.
Yeah, so it's the city of Alameda, the one that just got a conditional certification. They have to submit the formal one after adoption, but they had a voter initiative that said that they would not allow any multifamily zoning in the city.
Oh, okay.
And the council voted to say, no, we're overturning that. We're going to do an element that we need to introduce multifamily housing into our. So my understanding, it was a vote of the council. It wasn't like a take it back to the voters. The council voted.
Thank you.
Anyone else on those slides? Okay. I'm
So
going,
real quick, on that topic of things that may have to go to voters. I think it's worth keeping in mind and starting to track what in Pacific Grove would need voter referenda in order to change, because that's a political problem as much as it's a policy problem, and starting the marketing and public outreach for that in favor of it through the channels that are possible. Obviously, city staff and elected officials have different jobs when it comes to that. Because there may be things that cannot be resolved with existing ordinances and certain things that cannot be done unilaterally by city council.
yep. So when we get into the balancing act tool, there will be some sites in there that currently have voter restrictions on them that say you can't do housing. We opted to include them here. Almost every one of these sites have, or strategies have some obstacles associated with them. That would be one obstacle. For the purposes of the exercise we're doing now, it's like, do we want to see housing there? If we think that's a good place to put housing, then let's figure out how we overcome those obstacles. And in terms of voter restrictions, there are some sites that are in the tool that have voter restrictions. Whether that would require a vote of council or a vote of the community, I would have to defer to your city attorney to determine that. It's not my place, but we would definitely need some path to overturning the restriction that's on it currently. And we can talk about what those sites are. Before we do that, I'm going to jump to just the quick update on some of the engagement work. Anastasia and Angela have been doing a fantastic job out in the community. Just a quick update on some of the things that we've already done. The housing element survey is still live on the city's website in English and Spanish. We've had 3 community workshops. There's been some regional workshops. There were a couple workshops held with aquarium employees, and I'm going to ask Anastasia and Angela to just give us a quick update on a bunch of the things that they've been doing.
Hi, David. Thank you. Angela's in school today, but since she does that too. But we have had all of these outreach events, as you state here on the slide. We've also, I was able to meet with the school district. John wasn't there that day, but it's okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's all right. Appreciate the opportunity and you getting me in touch with the right people to make that happen. So I went to the school district and we talked about collaborating on our housing element, any getting the word out, in also just letting them know what's going on. So that was really helpful to meet with the school district. I appreciate that opportunity. We also met with the aquarium workers twice, the Gateway Center that houses 30 people with special needs within our community. That's a very important place in our community. And I would say they're about to have their 60th, I think, anniversary in like the next year or two. So that's pretty exciting. We've done National Night Out, updates at Planning Commission. The chamber has also gotten our survey out, which I really appreciate the chamber getting involved in assisting with that. Angela and I went out in front of the Lucky's grocery store to try to do some outreach on a Sunday, meeting people who are maybe a little more calm and not rushing around on a Sunday, which was good. And we also knocked on a bunch of doors on David Avenue at the apartments, trying to make sure that they're aware of what's happening and get their feedback on our survey as well. So those are some of the events that we've had. We're hoping to go out. We have Butterfly Days this Saturday, hoping to be out there. I'll be at the APA conference. I'm unable to attend, but I believe Angela will be there. And Claudia and I had a discussion to see if somebody from Planning Commission might also be able to assist. So that's where we're at. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much. Any questions from the group on outreach to date? I'm going to talk about the 2 things that are coming up. So one is that getting ready to launch the Balancing Act tool that you're going to help us test today. And we know there's some refinements that we've already identified, and we want your input as we do some final refinements and get that ready to push out. And that'll basically be live 24/7 We're planning to have that up for the rest of all of October. And that gives people an opportunity to tell us where they think the new housing should go. And then October 6th, as towards the start, just after launching that, we'll have a virtual community workshop from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And that's a chance to engage people in using the tool in a real-time setting, having some conversation about why they're making choices they are, and sort of what their preferred strategies are. And that all that input's going to help us as we basically develop the draft element in November. Initially an administrative draft for the staff to look at. We will be sharing with you some high level directions that's taking for your feedback in our meeting in November. And then there'll be some work with the Planning Commission and the Council and a public facing draft in the first quarter of 2023. So, any questions on everything else before we jump into the tool? Okay. So a few things. Like I said, this is a tool that lets you create a plan for meeting our RHNA. And it's both the RHNA number, which is locked. We need to create 1,125 units. And then you also get to select what level of buffer you think we should plan for. But you have to have some level of buffer. And I think we set it as 15% up to 30% additional units. And just a reminder, the reason for that is if we were to identify exactly 1,100 sites enough to accommodate 1,125 units, and then one of those sites that maybe we said, I'm just making up numbers, 100 units we're going to go on, and then someone comes in and develops an office building or retail center on that instead of housing, now we're in a deficit and we have to go back out and rezone somewhere else in order to create that capacity that we lost. So we highly recommend, the state highly recommends, to build in a buffer so that you're not midway through the planning period and needing to look at your inventory and rezone again. We'll walk through sort of the areas that we've identified. There's at least one strategy that touches everywhere in the city, but some of them are concentrated in certain locations. And basically allows you to choose different levels of intensity about how much additional housing you think should go there, or none. You can choose no housing here, but I think it should go over somewhere else. All the numbers represent what we think is a realistic capacity based on the different zoning intensities. All of them represent some level of rezoning. And you basically keep playing with where you're allocating units until the bar at the top of the tool turns green and you have a plan, and then you can submit it. And there's on each one of them, there's an opportunity to comment. And then there's also an area where you can put in other suggestions if you'd like. This is the map of the different areas, and this should, for those of you who are at the July 25th workshop, some of these should be somewhat familiar in terms of the areas. So downtown is one of the areas. We've got 3 different strategies we could implement downtown to create some new housing. Another is the area Central Erdley, which is marked with a 2 on the map. There's a couple strategies there. Lighthouse Avenue, opportunity to see a bit of additional housing there, not a lot, but some. Forest Hill, that actually has some pretty significant redevelopment, challenging redevelopment, but opportunities to create new housing there, and some of the shopping centers. And we give some examples of what that could involve and the numbers of units that could potentially be created. There's a number of areas marked with a 5. Those are close in neighborhoods where we could do some rezoning. We talked about this in the Welcome Home Initiative work, where that could help create some duplexes and small multi-unit developments in keeping with sort of the historic pattern that's there now, but doing some things to make those easier to achieve. And then there's several specific sites that have potentially significant redevelopment potential, and we'll talk about those. And we included also a conceptual site, which is to take 2 acres of some park or open space and put housing. We didn't identify, we don't have a proposal, but it felt strange not to have at least something where people said, well, we could put some housing over here. Given that over 20% of your land area is park and open space, and it's 340 some acres, and taking 2 acres of that potentially could be a strategy. And then there's 2 citywide strategies. One is related to ADUs and the other is related to lot splits. So we have not put these on the tool yet. We're still working on some visual examples to help people understand what these densities look like. So we have everything that in the tool, you'll have the opportunity to do everything from low density on some of the strategies, not all of them, up to high density on a couple of the strategies, not all of them. And you can basically, the challenge of DUs per acre as a measure is I'll just get as an example. Under medium high density here, the image on the screen, on the bottom, there's the Holman block. That is not developed at 60 to 80 dwelling units per acre. That's actually developed, I think it's close to 30 units per acre. But that's because they're really big units inside. So you could easily have put more units in there if it was zoned differently and still have the same building envelope. It's a 4-story building, the 4th floor is set back. But that's an example. A 4-story building is sort of how we're defining what the structure could look like with a number of units inside it. I see there's something in the chat. Are we only looking at those sites on the last slide in this tool? Help me understand that, John.
Oh, I mean, there's more to the city than those 7 sites that you've identified, right? So.
Well, those 7 areas, correct. And so one of the things we want to hear from you is, are there other areas or opportunities we should include on the tool? These are the areas we think have the most potential just based on your historic development pattern in terms of creating particularly higher density housing opportunities, that those would likely be clustered in the downtown, on your corridors, Forest Hill. But, it certainly is an option to create higher density elsewhere.
I guess and forgive me for interrupting, but I guess I don't quite understand why the entire city isn't open.
Well, there are some strategies. There's 2 strategies.
Yeah.
2 strategies apply citywide, which is to increase ADU, to encourage more ADUs, and to encourage lot splits. To be taking a single family property and subdividing it to create 2 or more units.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just call out, John, for your benefit. 6A is the adult school site. So that's actually an example of something that currently has a voter restriction on it. It will require both support from the school district and some act to remove that voter restriction in order for it to be a housing site.
Yeah, that's by Monarchs, David. I think that's verboten.
Okay, so we'll get to that and sort of see what we want to keep in the mix or take off. But so you'll not see these examples currently on the Balancing Act site, but we're going to be integrating some visuals into the site to help people understand what we mean by these different densities. So we're going to break into small groups so that you can play with the tool. We're going to give you a link to the tool. And again, so we're not going to do a whole demo for you right now, because the idea is this is something we will send people a description of and a link to, and they have to figure it out on their own. So we want to see if you figure it out or if you get lost or confused. Well, we'll ask each of you to do your plan via the link that you have, but engage in conversations. So both to help figure out how to use it and why you're making choices or what questions are coming up for you. Please keep track. We're going to divide ourselves up with you. Actually, Josh or Victor, one of you, if you could help get us set up to go into the small groups, and ideally put one of us in each of the small groups. So I think if we did 3 small groups, I think that'd be good. Yeah, so Victor's put the link to the balancing act tool in the chat. We're going to spend about 20 minutes going through the tool, each of you making your housing plan. And then when we come back, we'll have a few questions that we want to hear your feedback on, sort of your experience using it. What did you learn from doing it? What was confusing? What would you change? Anything else? Does that make sense to everyone? Any questions before we go into the small groups? Hey, Jan, thanks for joining.
Are we going to the link first or the group first?
You can go to the link and then we're going to divide into small groups. Josh or Victor, were you able to divide us into groups?
Yeah. Are we ready?
I think so.
Long time no see.
Yeah, where is everybody? I'm gonna just ping him on chat. Cool. Well, we'll see what other people's, we could lose Claudia when we go from room to room. I don't know what's going on.
David, since you're here, I just have a question, not really related to Pacific Grove, but just housing elements in general. So I'm not sure if you guys are still working with like San Mateo and 21 Elements over there.
Of
But
course.
how does it work in jurisdictions like San Mateo, where they have voter imposed height restrictions? How does that interface with the housing element?
Well, if they're able to demonstrate that they can meet the RENA within that, then they're okay. But if that is creating an impediment to achieving their RENA and their fair housing requirements, then they would have to find a path to removing or relieving those restrictions.
And do you see a situation where they wouldn't have to relieve those
I
restrictions?
mean, there's some jurisdictions that, actually some jurisdictions have had a somewhat easy time comparatively, because maybe they just finished a general plan update or a specific plan that created significant new housing opportunities. And so they're able to meet their RENA without doing rezoning now, because they've just done that. I'm trying to think, South San Francisco was doing their general plan update at the same time. So, and Redwood City actually just submitted their second draft because they just also went through a whole downtown process. And they had a kind of a quantitative cap of how many units they could approve in a given year, and they've removed that. So that wasn't a voter initiative, though. That was a city imposed. So the council voted to remove that cap.
Yeah.
So it varies quite a bit by jurisdiction. But yeah, but voter initiatives, some of them, and in some cases, the state has found voter initiatives to be illegal.
Yeah.
And have overridden them. And we haven't, we'll see where we end up in this process with Pacific Grove, and if there are some specific sites where we need to look at removing a voter restriction, we'll have to work with the city attorney to figure out what the path is for that.
Yeah.
And I had a question. We haven't updated our general plan, as you know, for many years. And we're going to do a focused general plan update. Do you think that will help us in getting this taken care of in a timely manner? And
yeah, I mean, it's going to be essential for getting to a certified element, because we definitely need to be looking at rezoning, and a lot of your zoning is tied to your general plan density designations. So those aspects of the general plan are going to be updated as well. So I think it's, one, getting that process going so that as we're talking with HCD to get certification, that we can point to a process that's underway that's going to make those changes real, rather than just talking conceptually about it.
And also, don't you think that that safety and transportation are part of that as well? I mean, especially the transportation. I don't know if that, that was in the focus plan. I think it is.
I don't know. I'm not that familiar with the other aspects of your general plan,
Yeah,
but I would
yeah.
assume they're probably going to need some. I mean, at the end of the day, the general plan has to be internally consistent.
Yes, and right now it's got some issues.
Yeah, it's
I'm
a
being
challenge.
taxed.
It's a challenge. Just it's a lot of work updating each one of those elements, and then the environmental reviews is particularly challenging in terms of just it's a lot of resources.
A lot of resources, and then also to make sure that our codes, our municipal codes match up with what we're saying we're going to do too. I mean, it's.
Yep. Yeah. So the other groups are, I don't know what
Where
Where'd they go?
you guys. I'm just a little concerned about the time. We're down to like 15 minutes left. They must be having a good time.
Write them a note and say, come on and join us.
And David, I know it had been discussed before, but just wondering where objective standards are and if that's going to be tied into this whole conversation.
Objective standards, what the proposal is that the city is going to engage a consultant to do the rezoning and objective standards at the same time, which I think is a lot of sense. Because a lot of those standards will just be part of the zoning. And what I've seen in other communities is basically some variation of a form-based code, a hybrid form-based code that be put in place that defines the envelope and allows a bit more latitude in terms of density and size of units of what could be inside of the building envelope.
Can you talk a little bit, David, just about form-based code? I've gone to a couple of seminars about them, but I'm still a little bit confused. They look really great. Would it work for us in Pacific Grove?
It can. I mean, my number one talking point is it's not going to solve all your problems.
I'm aware of that.
When I was in Boulder, we'd implemented a form-based code in an area that we'd done a lot of specific plan for and a lot of community discussion about. It definitely helped with the review processes that happened after that. And there were some architects who were frustrated by it because they felt they could be as creative as they wanted to be.
Oh.
But I mean, particularly for affordable housing, it creates just greater certainty. Like, here's the rules. And now it's what is required by the state for developments that meet certain affordability requirements that, tell us what your requirements are up front so I can figure out whether my building's going to work. And if it's going to work, I can come in with a plan that meets your requirements and I get approved, rather than something that is much more subjective and subject to interpretation. Salinas is doing it citywide. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're working with PlaceWorks, but I've been checking it out and it seems to be working great for the city and just development options to meet the arena.
I mean, the proof's in the pudding in terms of, its implementation. And does it give you the kinds of buildings that you're looking for? We did a thing twice, actually, when I was in Boulder, where we had a draft of the code and we had a break the code contest where we invited local architects to come up with the absolute worst building they thought was possible using the draft code. And it was really fun, and it really helped us do some troubleshooting to make the code better. Yeah.
You should do that in Pacific Grove.
Sorry, David, I didn't see the note that you guys were back in the main room.
Yeah, no, I don't have whatever, one of you became the host and I don't have the ability to call people back. So anyway, we're having a good conversation. How'd it go in your group?
We had a good time troubleshooting a little bit and getting familiar with the technology, but I think overall it was pretty successful.
Do you have the ability to call people back to the room, or is that just Victor?
I think it's just Victor.
Yeah. Well, he'll come back to me.
Let's see, I'll chat him.
Yeah, I can't even chat him.
Oh yeah, I'll write, let's see, I'll write in.
I lost my,
On the bottom right of the screen was a place when it didn't, there were yeah, there's something to click to come back to the breakout room, but above it, there was something to click to leave. So I would imagine that a couple of, that a couple of folks wound up leaving when they
Oh,
intended to
leaving the
just
whole
leave
thing.
the breakout room.
okay.
Oh yeah, we might have lost, let's see. It looks like we
Rosemary.
might have lost Rosemary.
Okay, well, she should be able to rejoin the meeting and she'd come back here.
I just want to let Anastasia know that we would like them all back, so they should
Okay,
go back in here in a second.
All right,
Yep.
yeah, it says all breakout rooms will close in 50 seconds. Yep.
okay. Phew.
We're
Well,
here.
Welcome back.
So Anastasia, I'm going to finish my thought there, even though not
John,
everybody's back. But the fact is, if we can put 1175 in what he said, I mean, I'm generous when I say it's maybe a third of the city and only 180 in the other 2/3. That's something's wrong there, that we haven't allocated space in the manner in which we should be considering it. So.
Okay. I think we've got most, it seems like we're fewer people, but I know some people had to leave early. Let's talk. So I've had a chance to talk with our group. I'd like to hear from the other groups in terms of your experience using the tool, what you learned, what was confusing, and what sort of changes we should think about for refining this if we're going to go forward and share it out with the community. About
I just wanted to see if you could address John's comment a little bit about where we focused the areas and why not the whole city.
so looking at wholesale rezoning of the entire city? Or, okay, I mean, if that's something you want to put as an option, we can do that. In our experience, that doesn't tend to be very successful. So you have in your current zoning, you have areas of concentrated development and areas of lower density development. The options we've put here would be an incremental increase in intensity in those areas where you have historically had more density, and an incremental increase in the lower density to a slightly less low, but it's not, I mean, it's mostly relying on strategies that are in place, but we could do more to encourage people to build ADUs. In the close-in neighborhoods, there is the option, we've put in the option in the tool, and we've talked about it in before, of sort of this missing middle housing idea. Well, not idea, reality. You actually have a number of missing middle types. So this is the middle type of housing between a larger apartment building and a single family home. Duplexes, townhomes, small apartment buildings that we used to build a lot of and we don't build, or we don't even zone for anymore. So you have a lot of great examples of missing middle housing in your older close-in neighborhoods, those ones we highlighted, where it's pretty challenging to build those today. But we could make change to the zoning to encourage more. So that would be an upzoning from what you have currently, but it's not saying let's build 4- and 5-story buildings in all those neighborhoods. It's saying let's do more townhomes and small apartment buildings, 2-story, 2.5-story. If you want to put on the table that we would rezone to create 4-story apartment buildings, 5-story apartment buildings in other parts of the city, including low density, we can do that. If you'd like us to give that option.
I would say too, I mean, one of the things that if we're going to increase we're trying to reduce parking and, you know, these are things that are coming down from the state, that if we're able to be focused in our development and upzoning, that we're able to provide more transit to those areas. So I see right now that we have 2 main focus areas where we could really work with transit agencies and say, this is where we're focusing our future development. How can you help us get more service to these areas so we can meet the state's requirements? So I get like, yeah, why not the whole city? But also if we're gonna do this, we want to move forward in a fashion that really will address the needs of the residents. And we also talked about in our group retail and being able to go to the grocery store and not just converting everything into housing, but having, you know, saving some of that retail space and commercial space.
Yeah, Don.
My comments weren't necessarily to drive us to rezone the whole city, but just for the tool. When you look at the tool, it looks as if geographically, we're just going to make changes in what look like maybe 30% of the city. And so some way to label the map on the tool to
For
get
sure.
across the ADUs and other possibilities for the rest of the city.
Sure.
And I think for a lot of people, you know, for better or worse, they're concerned with their own neighborhood. And when you look at the map, and most people wouldn't be affected because they're in this area that's not labeled, I think that might cut down on participation and interest in the
Yeah.
housing element. I mean, I know a lot of people are interested in the whole city, don't misunderstand me. But many, if you look at the map and you're way off in the beach track and you're not touched by these changes, I don't know how much some people care.
Right. So we can easily make a change to the map so it's clear that there are some citywide strategies.
Yeah, and that's separate from the rezone, the whole city. And I think there is, you know, we've been talking about this for a couple of years and we've stayed away from that, but it's worth talking about it, I think.
I mean, you have under state law, every single family property, except coastal zone properties are different. The potential to create 4 units on every one of those properties. The reality of that is very, 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 very low. But we could do things to make it more attractive or more doable in everywhere or in particular parts of the city. And to the point, actually, Elizabeth brought up in our group to talk about the, you know, transit planning and sort of an opportunity to engage with the transit agency to improve transit service, because right now it's not particularly great. But, you know, this gets into then sort of concentrating housing opportunities in the corridors, which is your historic pattern. Your historic pattern is basically lighthouse and forest, and it creates a T in downtowns where they come together. And that's your sort of historic areas of greater intensity. Other feedback on the tool, your experience using it, Jay?
The tool itself makes sense. I found myself scrolling back and forth before. Josh did a great job of explaining to us and kind of helping us through it. I would suggest, I've done a lot of training programs over the years, having Josh or someone just record himself going through and using it, so that instead of explaining it and trying to transfer it to reading to what I'm doing, showing him going back and forth to look and say, this is where it is. And, you know, I think something that you could click on that was a 2 or 3 minute video that explained how to use the tool would really improve the uptake as well as the people getting it the way what they think.
Great. Good idea. Val, you had your hand up too.
Yeah, I was going to summarize our meeting that Donald was talking about integrating Zone 7. So we thought that like another level of overlay transparency of Zone 7 would be good. And then we also gave these comments to Victor, and then adding right below the main aerial map, a visual chart from your slides for the density scale with the pictures from our town would be helpful.
Right.
And then we also gave him the feedback of changing the language on the submit category button, because that's a little confusing with the main submit button. So maybe saying save or just something else.
Right. Okay, great. Don.
Should we submit the whole thing just so that you see what we did?
Yeah, you submit it, and because then, so we've got basically from this meeting, we'll have what you all said in your housing plans. We'll be able to summarize it.
My God. I was really struggling with it. I'm going to tell you that I found myself thinking I want to get the most units that we can out of the city. There are so many desperate people that are driving an hour and a half to work in Pacific Grove one way. And we've got climate issues to consider with that. And we've got a lot of people who can't live close to their parents because they can't afford to live here. I just feel such a desperation to get the most units we can out of this opportunity. Now, that's not really an informed thing for this survey. You know, I'm so driven by wanting us to see units, and I don't know which are the most practical and which are the ones we have the best chance of getting. And you all seem to have much more informed feelings about that and knowledge about that than I do. I just know that we cannot forget that. We cannot forget that. This is a real opportunity, and we have to do everything we can to maximize every site. We just have to.
Well, you can certainly
all I'll
do that in your survey and say, put the max on everything.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I'm hoping is a takeaway. Go ahead. One of the things I'm hoping is a takeaway from doing it is that getting to Urena is actually doable. That, you know, yes, it's going to mean change, but there are multiple paths actually to getting there. So Don, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what specifically are we going to do as far as outreach to have people do this survey? Because the more people who do it, the better, obviously.
That's a perfect segue to our final section, which is outreach. So we're going to be, so October 6th is a virtual community workshop where we're going to engage the broad community in doing what you just did and a refined version of it based on your feedback. We'll be refining the tool. We'll be actually launching the tool prior to the workshop so people can actually get on and play with it before the workshop. But at the workshop, they'll do their housing plan just like you just did, and we'll have conversation about why they're making the choices they are, and be able to answer questions they have about density and other things. So we want your help in getting the word out, both for the workshop and for people who can't make the workshop to just get online and do their housing plan, play with the tool and hit submit. And that'll be a way for us to get a sense of what people are saying. And as you go into the survey, into the tool, and as you leave the tool, there's going to be some questions about, you should have had questions today about where you live or do you work here. So we'll also be able to tell from, people who work here but don't live here, people who are lower income, people who are tenants versus homeowners, sort of how the response varied, if at all, in terms of where they think housing should go. And sort of what the recommended strategies are. John, if you had your hand up, and then John at first, and then Jay.
Well, you said the plan is very viable, and I agree. It's an easy plan. Construction of 1,125 units is, to me, it's still not even close to possible. We can't construct that fast. I mean, think about, well, you're not part of this, but the Holman building only took Craig and Company 6 years, and that was 26 units. Okay, they're expensive units, and the building was old. The one that's going in on Goodies is going to be a 3-year. And that's right now, that's 10 units. Let's pretend we built it fully out and it's 30 units. There's something else that has to happen here.
So yes, this exercise is like, where would we locate new housing? And then we're going to need also programs to help facilitate the housing outcomes. The housing element is a planning document. It's not a construction or funding commitment. We don't, the challenge of Pacific Grove is you have pretty limited funding resources to support the creation of particularly affordable housing. You do have some land resources, and that's where some of these sites, not all of them, but some of them could potentially be a key way in which the city helps to facilitate some outcomes. But first, the question for the community is, where should this housing go? And then we'll figure out some of the strategies for making it happen. And, all of this is assuming that there's water. So, you all know that,
Yes.
got a water moratorium that makes it really challenging. But we'll be speaking to that in the element and sort of what works underway to help address that. But we're not going to be addressing it or fixing the water problem in the element itself. We're a little over time, so I want to respect if people need to jump off, but I also want to hear from folks. So if you can stay on, great, please
Yes,
stay
sir.
on.
I just had one quick question is should you count your social security as a part of your annual household income? A lot of times they want that or not want that.
If that's your income, yeah, count it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Elizabeth?
Yeah, leading off of Dawn's points, and this is probably a question for Anastasia. Has Pacific Grove looked into applying for the pro-housing designation at all yet?
Yes, I have contacted the state and I've spoken to Salinas because they're in the process of doing that. We haven't, and actually David and I discussed it, what the steps were. So we've looked into it. We're, you know, there are a lot of requirements in order to do that. So it's a long-term thing to get it done. And not many jurisdictions actually have met all the criteria yet.
And Anastasia, and just another thought, the Inflation Reduction Act and all sorts of other grants and things that are going through do provide rebates for resilience, depending on how you build, all electric things, and there are community grants for communities to do things and help set it up and get it done. I just want to alert you, I am not knowledgeable about them, only that they are there. But there's a number of grants that can help us achieve this number and saves and to make it less expensive in a lot of ways. And certainly PG would qualify, I should think.
And I just want to call out the expertise we have in our group. Jan was not here at the intros, but she has a new role position. You want to just say a quick word, Jan? And then I know a couple of people have hands up.
Yeah, sure. I'm a 20+ year PG resident and also 30+ years in affordable housing, and I'm now working for an affordable housing lender. So looking to bring different new capital sources to build housing of all types faster and more cheaply. So wish me luck.
We're all counting on you. So yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
Gabe.
Yeah, so I brought this up with Josh, and it's probably not a question that can be answered quickly or even should be answered today. But since Pacific Grove is kind of on the leading edge in Monterey County, especially on the peninsula for that matter, I would just love to get insight from you as you're going through this process on how you're creating realistic capacity. And I think we've sort of been nodding to it with the feasibility questions here, but cities like Monterey and Carmel and Seaside too, to an extent, are going to have real trouble justifying any development probabilities, whether it's the 20 or 25 or 30% that you're using in the tool or something lower. But I just would love to be a part of those conversations as possible so that we can start communicating to the other cities as they're trying to strategize.
Sure. And we're actually planning to do a session with some of the other cities of staff just to share the Balancing Act tool and sort of how we put it together and to see if they're interested.
Good luck.
Thanks. And Val, I think you had your hand up earlier. Did you get your?
Yeah, I saw Jan put it in the chat. I was just asking for, I want to be consistent in the message that we're sending when we do outreach. So if you guys could send us like a format for pushing out emails,
Yep.
the language, that'd be great.
We will be doing that probably later today. If not today, then tomorrow. But Victor's been putting some materials together that we'll get out to you. So we are over time, but I wanted to thank you very much for your engagement, your feedback, super helpful. We'll be doing some refinements and then getting this publicly launched and asking you to help us get the word out. And join us on October 6th if you're able to. That'll be recorded. This meeting also will be recorded and the slides will be put up on the website. We'll send you a link to those once they're up. And anything else, Anastasia, you want to add?
No, there was one quick question from Dawn is, can people fill it out more than once? So that's something to look at. And I just really appreciate everybody attending today and all your feedback and trying out the tool. So thank you once again.
So the tool you filled out today is specific to this meeting. So once it's live, you can fill it out again, but I think it does limit you in terms of your IP address. I'll have to check that. I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Might still just
Care.
require.
Great, thanks all.
Thank you.
Care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you all.